The contractions were hitting me like waves of fire when I heard his phone buzzing for the 7th time in 10 minutes. I was gripping the hospital bed rails, sweat pouring down my face, and all I could think was, please, Marcus, just be here with me. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Pure terror. Not the kind of fear every expectant father feels, but the terror of a man who was already planning his escape. I can't do this, Sarah, he whispered, backing away from my bed like I was carrying some contagious disease. The nurse was adjusting my IV, completely oblivious to the fact that my world was about to shatter into a million pieces. I'm not ready to be a father. I never was. Those words hit me harder than any contraction ever could. Here I was, 36 weeks pregnant, in active labor, and the man I had loved for 3 years was telling me he was abandoning me. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now, in the most vulnerable moment of my life. You're joking, right? I managed to gasp between contractions. Marcus, our daughter is coming. She's coming today. But he was already grabbing his jacket from the chair. His hands were shaking, and I could see tears in his eyes. But that didn't make what he was doing any less devastating. I'm sorry, Sarah. I thought I could do this, but I can't. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not. The monitor next to my bed started beeping frantically. My blood pressure was spiking, and suddenly there were 3 nurses around me, asking if I was okay. But how could I be okay? The father of my child was walking out on me while I was literally bringing his daughter into the world. Please don't leave me, I begged, my voice breaking. I need you. She needs you. He stopped at the door, and for one desperate second I thought he might come back. But then he turned around, and the look in his eyes was something I'll never forget. Guilt mixed with relief, like he was finally free from a burden he never wanted to carry. Take care of her, he said, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the nurses seemed stunned. I was alone, completely alone, about to become a mother in the most traumatic way possible. The woman in the bed next to me was surrounded by her husband, her mother, her sister, a whole support system celebrating the miracle of life. And there I was, abandoned and broken, with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat echoing through the monitors. That's when the panic really set in. How was I going to raise a child alone? I was 26, working as a graphic designer, living in a tiny apartment in Denver. I had barely enough money to cover my own expenses, let alone support a baby. Marcus had promised we'd figure it out together, that we'd be a team. Now I was facing the most challenging journey of my life, with no partner, no backup plan, and no idea how I was going to survive. The contractions were getting stronger, and with each one, the reality of my situation became clearer. I was about to become a single mother, whether I was ready or not. But as I lay there, clutching the hospital sheets and trying not to fall apart completely, I had no idea that this moment of absolute devastation was actually the beginning of the most extraordinary chapter of my life. Because sometimes, when everything falls apart, the universe has a way of putting the pieces back together in ways you never could have imagined. But first, I had to survive the next 24 hours, and that was going to test every ounce of strength I had left. Little did I know, the man walking out that door was making the biggest mistake of his life, and destiny was already preparing to show me just how strong I really was. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to share with you the most painful, yet ultimately transformative story of my life. It's a story about betrayal, survival, and the incredible power of a mother's love. But more than that, it's about how sometimes our greatest disasters become our most beautiful blessings, even when we can't see it in the moment. Before I continue, I want you to know that sharing this story isn't easy for me. Even now, 4 years later, there are parts of this journey that still make me cry. But I'm telling you this because I know there are other women out there who might be going through something similar, who might feel as lost and terrified as I did that day in the delivery room. If that's you, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that your story is far from over. Please, if this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me continue sharing these real, raw stories that might help someone else who's struggling. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. It's incredible how these stories connect us across continents, and knowing you're there with me makes sharing these vulnerable moments so much more meaningful. Now, let me take you back to September 15th, 2019, in Denver, Colorado. That morning, I had woken up feeling like the luckiest woman alive. I was 36 weeks pregnant with a healthy baby girl we had already named Emma Rose. Marcus and I had spent months preparing for her arrival, painting the nursery a soft lavender, assembling the crib together, reading parenting books side by side on our tiny apartment couch. Just 3 weeks before Emma's due date, everything seemed perfect. Marcus had been so attentive throughout my pregnancy, talking to my belly every night, making midnight runs for my weird cravings, holding my hair back during those brutal first trimester morning sickness episodes. He had even started working overtime at the construction company to save extra money for the baby. I thought we were solid, that we were ready to become parents together. But looking back now, I realized there were signs I had chosen to ignore. The way he would sometimes stare off into space when I talked about the future with Emma, how he'd gotten quieter as my due date approached, the increasing frequency of his late nights out with friends, claiming he needed one last taste of freedom before becoming a dad. I had rationalized all of it, convinced myself it was just normal pre-fatherhood anxiety. That morning, when my water broke around 6 a.m., I was actually excited. This was it. We were finally going to meet our daughter. Marcus seemed excited too, rushing around the apartment, grabbing the hospital bag we'd packed weeks earlier, calling his boss to let him know he wouldn't be at the construction site that day. During the 20-minute drive to Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, he held my hand and told me how proud he was of me, how amazing I was going to be as a mother. The first few hours of labor were exactly what I had imagined. Marcus was my rock, helping me breathe through contractions, feeding me ice chips, cracking jokes to keep my spirits up. He even took selfies of us together, saying he wanted to document every moment of Emma's birthday. I remember thinking, this is exactly how it should be. We're doing this together. But as my labor progressed and got more intense, I started noticing changes in Marcus. He became fidgety, constantly checking his phone, stepping out to take calls he claimed were from work. When I asked him to stay close, he would, but I could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his jaw would clench when another contraction hit and I would grip his hand tighter. The turning point came around hour 8 of labor. I was exhausted, in pain, and starting to panic because Emma's heart rate had dropped slightly, causing concern among the medical staff. That's when I needed Marcus most, when I needed him to be strong for both of us. Instead, that's when his mask completely fell off, and I saw the truth he had been hiding. He wasn't just nervous about becoming a father, he was terrified of the commitment, of the responsibility, of having to put someone else's needs before his own for the rest of his life. And instead of talking to me about these fears, instead of working through them together like partners should, he had made the coward's choice. He had decided to run. The worst part wasn't even him leaving. It was the timing. Not only was he abandoning me during labor, but he was abandoning his daughter before she even took her first breath. What kind of man does that? What kind of person looks at someone they claim to love, someone who's carrying their child, and decides that the moment she needs them most is the perfect time to disappear? As I watched him walk out that door, I felt something inside me break that I didn't know could break. It wasn't just my heart, though that was shattered beyond recognition. It was my faith in people, my belief in love, my confidence in my ability to judge character. How had I been so wrong about someone I thought I knew better than myself? But here's what I didn't know in that moment of complete devastation. Marcus leaving was actually the best thing that could have happened to me and Emma, even though it felt like the worst. Because what happened next, in the hours and days that followed, would prove to me that I was stronger than I ever imagined, and that sometimes the universe removes people from our lives not as punishment, but as protection. However, before I could discover any of that strength, I had to survive the most terrifying night of my life, and that's when everything really began to fall apart. The first 12 hours after Marcus left were pure hell, but not for the reasons you might think. Yes, the emotional devastation was overwhelming, but what came next was something I never could have prepared for. A cascade of complications that would test every fiber of my being and push me to the absolute edge of what I thought I could endure. About 2 hours after Marcus walked out, just as I was trying to process the fact that I was truly alone, the doctor came in with a look that made my blood run cold. Dr. Martinez, who had been so calm and reassuring throughout my pregnancy, now had worry written all over her face. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said, pulling up a chair next to my bed. "Emma's heart rate is dropping more frequently, and her positioning has shifted. We're looking at some potential complications that we need to address immediately." My mind went blank. Complications? What kind of complications? I was supposed to have a normal, healthy delivery. Everything had been perfect throughout my pregnancy. How could things be going wrong now, when I was already at my breaking point? What does that mean exactly? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. It means we might need to consider a C-section if her heart rate doesn't stabilize. But Sarah, I need to ask, is there someone we can call? A family member? A friend? You shouldn't be going through this alone. That's when the full reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. My parents lived in Ohio, over 1,000 miles away. They couldn't just drop everything and fly to Denver, especially not on such short notice. My sister lived in California, dealing with her own pregnancy complications. I had friends, sure, but none close enough to handle something this intense. Marcus had been my emergency contact, my person, my support system. Now I had no one. There's nobody, I whispered, and saying those words out loud felt like admitting defeat before I had even begun to fight. The next few hours were a blur of medical procedures, monitoring, and increasing panic. Emma's heart rate would stabilize for 30 minutes, giving me hope, then drop again, sending the medical team into action. I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster, never knowing if the next update would be good news or devastating news. But the worst part wasn't the medical uncertainty. It was the practical reality of what I was facing. During one of the brief stable periods, when the nurses stepped out and I was alone with my thoughts, the full magnitude of my situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. I was about to become a single mother with absolutely no plan. My savings account had exactly $3,247 in it, barely enough to cover the hospital bill, let alone support a baby. My health insurance would cover the delivery, but what about everything that came after? Formula, diapers, childcare so I could work, a bigger apartment, a car seat, a stroller. The list felt endless and insurmountable. My job as a freelance graphic designer was barely stable enough to support myself, let alone a child. Most of my clients expected quick turnarounds and constant availability. How was I going to manage deadlines and client calls while taking care of a newborn? And what if Emma had health issues? What if she needed special care or medication? I couldn't afford any of it. The financial panic was crushing, but even worse was the emotional weight. I kept replaying Marcus's words in my head. I'm not ready to be a father. I never was. Did that mean he had been lying to me for months? Had our entire relationship been built on false promises? How could someone fake excitement about starting a family, help pick out baby clothes, and practice changing diapers if they never intended to stick around? Around 2 a.m., when Emma's heart rate dropped to a dangerous level and stayed there for more than 10 minutes, Dr. Martinez made the call. Sarah, we need to do an emergency C-section. Now. I had always imagined that if I needed a C-section, Marcus would be there holding my hand, telling me everything would be okay. Instead, I was being wheeled into surgery completely alone, surrounded by masked strangers, with no one to advocate for me or Emma if something went wrong. The surgery itself was terrifying in ways I hadn't anticipated. The epidural made me numb from the chest down, but I was wide awake, staring at the bright surgical lights, listening to the medical team's urgent conversations about Emma's condition. I could hear the beeping of monitors, the sound of surgical instruments, but I couldn't see what was happening to my own body, couldn't move to protect myself or my daughter. Is she okay? I kept asking. Is Emma okay? The minutes felt like hours. Finally, at 2:47 a.m. on September 16, 2019, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, my daughter's first cry. But instead of relief, I felt a new kind of terror. She was here, she was real, and she was completely dependent on me. There was no going back, no changing my mind, no calling Marcus to come help. From that moment forward, every decision, every mistake, every success would be mine alone. When they placed Emma on my chest for the first time, I looked into her tiny face and felt love so intense it was almost painful. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a head full of dark hair, and the most incredible little face I had ever seen. But mixed with that overwhelming love was a paralyzing fear. How was I going to keep this perfect little person safe and happy when I could barely keep myself together? The next morning brought a new set of challenges. The hospital social worker came by to discuss discharge planning, and when she realized I was completely on my own, her expression changed. She started asking questions about my support system, my living situation, my ability to care for a newborn. I could tell she was concerned, and that concern made me feel like I was already failing as a mother. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said gently, I want to make sure you have all the resources you need. Being a single parent is incredibly challenging, especially with a newborn. There are programs that can help. WIC, temporary financial assistance, parenting classes. Would you be interested in learning about these options? I felt my cheeks burn with shame. I was 26 years old, college educated, and successful in my career. I had never imagined I would need government assistance or charity to take care of my own child. But as I looked at Emma sleeping in her bassinet, I realized that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. My daughter's well-being was more important than my ego, but accepting help was just the beginning of my challenges. What happened when we got home would test every assumption I had about my own strength and force me to discover capabilities I never knew I possessed. 3 weeks after bringing Emma home, I thought I had hit rock bottom. I was wrong. The real test of my strength was just beginning, and it would come from a direction I never saw coming. It was 3:17 a.m. on October 8th when my phone rang. Emma had finally fallen asleep after hours of colicky crying, and I had just dozed off on the couch, too exhausted to make it to my bed. The sudden sound made my heart race. Nothing good ever happens when your phone rings at that hour. Sarah? Sarah, is that you? It was my landlord, Mr. Peterson, and he sounded panicked. Yes, it's me. What's wrong? There's been a fire in the building. Not in your unit, but the apartment below yours. The fire department is evacuating everyone. You need to get out now. And I mean now. My mind went completely blank for a moment. Fire? Evacuation? I could smell smoke now that he mentioned it, an acrid scent that was getting stronger by the second. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her crib, completely unaware that our world was about to be turned upside down again. I hung up and ran to Emma's room, scooping her up so quickly that she startled awake and began crying. With her in one arm, I frantically grabbed her diaper bag with the other, stuffing in formula, diapers, and a change of clothes. I could hear sirens getting closer, see flashing lights reflecting off my window. The hallway was already filling with smoke when I opened my apartment door. Other tenants were rushing past, some in pajamas, some carrying pets, everyone looking scared and confused. Mrs. Chen from down the hall was crying, clutching a small suitcase. The elderly man from 3B was being helped by his son, moving slowly with his walker. Everyone out, move quickly but don't run. A firefighter appeared at the end of the hallway, directing people toward the emergency exit. Emma was screaming now, terrified by all the commotion and the smell of smoke. As I made my way down the stairs, holding Emma tight against my chest, I realized I had grabbed almost nothing. No phone charger, no extra clothes for me, no important documents, no money. I didn't even have shoes on, just the slippers I had been wearing. Everything I owned was in that apartment, and I had no idea if any of it would survive. Outside, we all stood on the sidewalk watching firefighters battle the blaze. The fire had started in 2B, directly below my apartment, and was spreading upward. I could see flames licking at what I thought might be my kitchen window. Emma was shivering in the cold October air, and I realized I hadn't even grabbed a blanket for her. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go tonight?" A Red Cross volunteer approached me, clipboard in hand. "We're setting up temporary shelter at the community center, but with a baby, you might be more comfortable with family or friends." Family or friends. The words hit me like a slap. My parents were in Ohio. My sister was dealing with her own crisis in California. The few friends I had in Denver were either single and living in tiny studio apartments, or had their own families to worry about. Marcus flashed through my mind. He would have been the obvious call, the person who should have been there to help me figure out what to do next. But Marcus was gone. Probably didn't even know Emma existed anymore, and definitely wouldn't care that we were now homeless. I don't really have anywhere to go, I admitted, feeling Emma's tears soaking through my pajama shirt. The volunteer's expression softened. "That's okay, honey. We'll take care of you tonight, and tomorrow we can help you figure out next steps." The community center was chaos. Dozens of displaced residents trying to process what had happened. Red Cross volunteers distributing cots and blankets. Children crying. Adults making frantic phone calls to insurance companies and relatives. I found a quiet corner and tried to calm Emma down, but she could sense my stress and wouldn't stop fussing. That's when the real panic set in. It wasn't just that we were temporarily homeless, though that was terrifying enough. It was the realization that I had no safety net whatsoever. If this had happened to a normal family, they would have called parents or siblings or close friends. They would have had multiple options, people fighting to help them, spare bedrooms to stay in while they figured things out. I had none of that. I was completely, utterly alone with a 3-week-old baby, and everything we owned was potentially destroyed. My laptop with all my client work, my camera equipment that I used for photography projects, Emma's nursery that I had spent months preparing. All of it might be gone. But the worst realization came at 5 a.m. when I was trying to feed Emma and noticed she was running low on formula. I had grabbed only 2 bottles worth when we evacuated, and I had no money to buy more. My purse, with my wallet and credit cards, was back in the apartment. Even if I could access my bank account somehow, I had less than $200 left after paying bills and buying baby supplies. I sat in that folding chair, holding my hungry daughter, and felt more helpless than I had ever felt in my life. This wasn't just about missing Marcus anymore, or being angry that he had abandoned us. This was about survival, about my ability to provide the most basic necessities for my child. What kind of mother doesn't have enough money to feed her baby? What kind of life was I giving Emma? The volunteer who had helped us earlier, her name was Maria, noticed me crying and came over. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Is there something we can help with?" I was so embarrassed, but I had no choice. My daughter needs formula, but I don't have any money with me. Everything is back in the apartment and I don't know. "Say no more," Maria interrupted. "We have emergency supplies for exactly this situation. Let me get you what you need." As she walked away to get formula, I looked down at Emma's face. She had stopped crying and was looking up at me with those incredible dark eyes that reminded me so much of Marcus. But in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done feeling sorry for myself. I was done wishing Marcus would come back. Done hoping someone would rescue us. Done waiting for life to get easier. Emma deserved a mother who fought for her, who figured out solutions instead of dwelling on problems. Whatever it took, working 3 jobs, asking for help, swallowing my pride, making sacrifices I had never imagined. I was going to build a life for us. Not just survive, but thrive. But first, I had to get through the next 24 hours. And that's when I discovered that sometimes your darkest moment is actually the universe preparing you for your greatest breakthrough. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of our new apartment, making Emma's morning bottle and watching the sunrise paint the Denver skyline in shades of gold and pink. The apartment was small, but bright, with a nursery I had decorated myself and a living room where Emma could crawl around safely. As I listened to her babbling happily in her crib, I realized that the woman Marcus had left in that delivery room no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and infinitely more grateful for the life we had built together. The fire had destroyed almost everything we owned, but it had also burned away every last vestige of the old Sarah, the woman who needed someone else to validate her worth, who was afraid to take risks, who waited for permission to chase her dreams. From the ashes of that disaster, a new version of myself had emerged, and she was capable of miracles. Here's what I learned in those 6 months. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing in disguise. Marcus leaving forced me to discover strength I never knew I had. The fire pushed me to rebuild not just our living situation, but our entire life. And this time, I built it on a foundation that no one could shake. Within a month of the fire, I had made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I started my own graphic design business, focusing specifically on helping small businesses create their brand identity. Second, I began offering photography services for families, using skills I had learned in college but never pursued professionally. Third, and most importantly, I decided to document our journey on social media, sharing the real, unfiltered truth about single motherhood. That last decision changed our lives in ways I never could have imagined. My Instagram account, started as a way to process my own experiences and maybe help other single mothers feel less alone, began growing rapidly. Women from around the world started following our story, sharing their own struggles, offering support and advice. Brands began reaching out, wanting to partner with someone who represented real single motherhood, not the glossy, filtered version usually portrayed online. Within 6 months, I was earning more money than I had ever made working for other people. More importantly, I was building a community of strong, supportive women who lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. Emma and I had gone from having no family to having thousands of women around the world who cared about our story and our success. But the most incredible part of this story isn't about the business success or the financial independence. It's about Emma and the incredible little person she's becoming. At 10 months old, she is fearless, curious, and joyful, in ways that constantly amaze me. She has never known a world where she wasn't the center of someone's universe, never experienced a moment of doubt about whether she was wanted or loved. The father who abandoned her before she was born missed out on knowing the most extraordinary little girl I have ever met. And Marcus? 3 months ago, he called. He had heard through mutual friends about the fire, about our social media success, about the life we had built. He wanted to meet Emma, wanted to be part of our story, claimed he was ready to be a father now. I listened to his apologies, his explanations, his promises to do better, and then I said something that surprised even me. Thank you. Thank you? He sounded confused. Thank you for leaving, I said calmly. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were when it mattered most. Thank you for forcing me to become the woman Emma deserved as a mother. Thank you for your cowardice because it led to my courage. Emma doesn't need a father who sees her as a burden he's finally willing to carry. She has a mother who sees her as the greatest gift she's ever received, and a community of women who will show her what real strength looks like. To every woman watching this who feels broken, abandoned, or overwhelmed, your story is not over. The chapter that ends with someone walking away from you is not your final chapter. It's the setup for your greatest triumph. The person who leaves you in your darkest hour is not your person. Your person is the one who stays. And sometimes, that person is you. Subscribe if this story touched your heart. And remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and loved more than you realize. Your breakthrough is coming. The best plot twist of all was discovering I never needed saving. I was my own hero all along.